my dad because I don't want to leave him out. He lived there as well. He grew up in Buncombe. He was drafted in World War II. He landed at Normandy and on to the Battle of the Bulge, and of course drafted in the Army back then. So he got out. He spent an extra few months there. Everybody kind of has this picture, the war's over and everybody goes home. Well, that's not how it happens. There's a force that stays behind, an occupying force. When you win the war, some people stay behind and make sure that everything just kind of works out all right, especially when there's a world war. So a lot of GIs stayed behind, and my dad was one of them. He ended up working for Stars and Stripes. He drove a captain around who wrote about different battles, and my dad took pictures and drove the Jeep. So that was his job. So about an extra 6-8 months or so, he stayed in Europe. So he finally came home and he went to work at the shoe factory. And after a few months of that, thinking I'm going to make shoes the rest of my life, which he wasn't too excited about. So the United States Air Force started in 1947. So he took his discharge papers and went down to this brand new recruiter guy and said, I want to go back into service. I want to go in the Air Force. So he went from the Army to the Air Force after making a few pair of shoes and stayed in the Air Force until he retired and came back home and came back to Winchester with no job, no place to live, and oh, by the way, your mom was pregnant. So that's how we started our life here. I was going in the 9th grade, is where I was. I had a little brother and a little sister on the way, I found out. So my dad he taught for 30-some years over in the Winchester Church, the adult class like this, and he was an elder for 30-some years. So that's kind of his history. He worked in the post office. He finally got on the post office and ended up being the postmaster in Winchester, for those of you that live over there. My mom, she also grew up on a farm. She was the oldest daughter. She is Jasper's older sister. So her early recollection is picking cotton at the age of 6. She said 30-acre field of cotton. So there was an older brother, and he worked on the farm. But she and her next sibling was Margaret. Well, just a sideline to kind of set how they kind of grew up. Their dad kind of taught them as one of the hands on the farm. Jasper and all of them, they worked the farm. You know, farmers had big families. That wasn't an accident. They needed to help that they didn't have to pay. I asked her one time, I said, you know, picking the cotton, you know, he would come into Tullahoma at a certain hour and pick up people. And they would come out and work the farm, and at the end of the day, he would pay them. So I asked my mom, I said, well, what was the difference in y'all picking cotton and those people that he hired? He said, they got paid at the end of the day. My grandpa, his comment was, you eat, don't you? So that's why he never asked him for money, because if you sat at his table, you didn't need any money. So my mom grew up, whereas my dad went off to war. He quit high school, and he was working on the farm. The big two differences is the Smith family, they owned the farm. The Rogers family didn't own anything. They worked the farms, and they would go around Buncombe, and every farmer there, big farmer, had a house, and you would be a tenant. So the family would move in there, and they would work the farm until they roamed somewhere else, and they worked their farm. Well, that was the Rogers family. They never owned anything. So, but my dad was smart, and when the time came, he married the boss's daughter. So, yeah. And that worked out really well. She graduated from high school, and there were 6 years difference, because my dad had been to World War II and had come home. She didn't know my dad. She went to school with his sister. Because of their age difference, my mom was 10 years old when the war started. So my dad was a lot older. So, but finally, he kept coming home on vacation from the Air Force, and they started dating. And in 1951, they married. And 9 months later, I was born, almost to the day. They had a hard life, working a farm, you can imagine. But there's one thing that was consistent. My dad was in the service, so I didn't see my relatives very much, my grandparents. I didn't see them a lot until we got to Langley Air Force Base. It was my dad's last. He knew that he was getting out. I was in junior high school. So for whatever reason, I never understood this, they brought me home at the beginning of the summer and dropped me off at my pawpaw, as I called him, Smith, Jasper's dad. And I would spend my summers. And then a week before school started, they came back and picked me up. I don't know if they planned on me getting in trouble living on an Air Force base. You know, you can get in a lot of trouble as a teenager roaming around an Air Force base. So I don't know what the reason was, but it was a great thing.
They didn't have to feed you.
They didn't have to feed me, that was true. My grandmother was a great cook. She cooked for everybody, including all the hands that came out to work on the farm. She fed them too. She was constantly cooking and reading her Bible, which I'll get to in a second. So at Langley Air Force Base, another unique thing, my mom was always my Sunday school teacher. It was kind of unique. Every time we moved, which was a lot, you know, we'd go to the church, wherever it was, and she was my Sunday school teacher. Every time I got a different grade and moved up, she was my Sunday school teacher. I don't know how she did that, but it was just so. But finally, when I got to the 5th grade, we were at Langley Air Force Base. I got a new teacher, a male teacher, and y'all probably know him. He was Lieutenant Earl Price. So he was my first grade Sunday school teacher. He did a wonderful job. It was so unique to have a male teacher. I'd never done that before. So anyway, you see that today. That's generally what you see. The younger kids are taught by the women, and as they get up in grades, generally a male teacher is introduced, which is a good thing. The things I remember, my grandmother, she never sat down very much. She was always fixing meals or cooking meals or cleaning the dishes. And she was in charge of the garden and the orchard that they had. And my grandpa, he did all the animals and the feeding and everything else that goes along with farming, planting and picking cotton and all of that. So she had a big job to do. I never saw her sit down very much, but when I did, she would always get out her Bible and she would read it aloud. It was just something she did when I was there. So that if I was in the house or I wasn't with my grandpa, you know, I'd sit and listen to her, and that always ginned up some questions. So I'm sure she didn't mean it this way, but she ended up teaching me a lot. After my mom and dad got married, of course, my mom started traveling with my dad. She started teaching, like I said, Sunday school. She didn't teach a quarter or a year. She started teaching when I first remember, and she never stopped teaching. She taught Sunday morning, she taught Wednesday night. She never stopped teaching. My dad's an elder, 30 years at Winchester. She taught all of that time. I never know a time when she wasn't teaching Sunday school or Wednesday night and Vacation Bible School. It was just her thing. I think the interesting thing about that, though, she was a stay-at-home mom. Now, this was a different time. You know, back then, it was possible to have stay-at-home moms, and that's what she did. In the military, and when my dad retired and he was working at the post office. So she was always there. When me and my brother would get home, you know, the milk and the cookies or whatever it was, they were always there. And a chore list. She handed me the chore list. These are your chores. So eat up and get to work. They were very work conscious. Everybody worked. Her favorite thing is work never killed anybody. So even today, when I'm over at Brookdale to visit her, she's 95 now. My dad passed away 12 years ago. But, you know, she'll say, you know, if I say I can't come right now or something, finally she'll say, well, you're so busy. Why are you so busy? You know, you're retired. Why are you so busy? I said, because you made us work all the time. And when I said, why do we have to do this? Because it'll keep you out of trouble. And so So this is your fault I can't come over here. So, but anyway, because my mom and her love for the Lord and teaching children, she brought all that home with her. You can't help it. And my grandmother did the same thing. So these two ladies, my grandmother more when I was in junior high school and in the summers that I spent with them every summer. And of course my mom, just every day, she's there. She's always there every time I get home. So they love the Lord, and that just kind of, you can't avoid that. The scriptures say Timothy was faithful because of his upbringing. His dad was Greek, so did his dad teach him anything? Chances are he knew nothing about the Jewish law and the prophets. He didn't know anything about that. So how much influence did his dad have on him? Was his dad working somewhere like all of our dads used to do? So that was kind of in the day that I grew up. The dads were working a lot, and the moms helped not only raise the children, but I think in terms of their faith, they had a tremendous influence. Not only back then, but I think when I was growing up. I don't think that was the intent. I think when you go back to a Jewish family, the men had a great influence in that family. It not only was a Jew, this is where I was born, I'm a Jew and this is my faith. Both of those things, when you're called a Jew, that's two things. It's my faith and it's where I live. It's my nationality. So I think the dads brought a lot of that home to teach their children, and the moms did as well, as proof by the statement, about his mom and his grandmother. So they learned all of that. His dad wasn't going to be able to teach him that because he was Greek and he didn't know. And he probably had something to say about him being circumcised. He doesn't need to do that. He's a Greek. He didn't care about that. So he probably had some influence over that. But when the time came, Timothy was circumcised, as we learned. I think the work ethic and their love for the Lord out on farms, that's just what they did. Here we have Sunday school, we have Wednesday night, a lot of churches have Sunday night. They didn't do that back in the day. All of this Sunday school and VBS and going to church on Sunday night, that's a pretty new thing. When you're milking cows every morning and every afternoon, on Sunday morning, my mom got up, her and her sister, and Jasper when he came along, they got up and milked cows. Before they went to school, they had to milk cows. And then when they got home, they milked cows again. So, working on the farm was hard, but they never forgot about their faith. They were at church every Sunday. Buncombe had a Church of Christ in Buncombe. And you may not know this, but if you ever thought about, when communities were formed, Buncombe started in the late 1700s by my research. Why was there a Church of Christ? But generally people's faith back then, how it got started, if the Baptist preacher went to a community, everybody went to, there was one church. If he went to that community, they were all Baptist. If the Presbyterian guy showed up and he lived over there and the community started, they all turned out to be Presbyterian. Nobody walked, because nobody had a car in Buncombe. Only one person, Mr. Elder, was the richest guy, and he had a car. Nobody else had a car. Nobody's going to walk to Winchester or Tullahoma to go to church. Now, they had buggies, of course. So that had a great influence on that community. They were all, and all the reunions we had and all of that, they were all members of the Church of Christ because that was the only church in town. It wasn't like it is now where there's a church here in Tullahoma, all kinds of churches. So if you lived in a community that had a Baptist church, chances are you went to the Baptist church or the Church of Christ or the Methodist. I mean, that's kind of how they got started. There was only one church. So it had a great influence on the people. So it was just by happenstance, but a good thing. A lot of my family are members of the church today because they all grew up in Buncombe. And but it was just, my grandmother, which I got to know later after we got out of the military, and my mom, who still lives today, because of their love for the Lord and teaching at church, and they brought all that home and taught their children. So, that's it.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
The bell's rung. Thank you so much, Al, for
Mhm.
sharing very much. When you were talking about the cotton fields,
Yeah.
my mother was raised in a family of 10 children, cotton fields, worked those fields just like your family. One time, we were like, I know,
Oh.
one time, I asked my mother, I said, Mother, because she had described about how working the cotton fields, they'd come in, their hands would just be completely covered in blood, from working. I asked my mother, I said, Mother, do you miss working in those cotton fields? Lord, no, I don't miss picking cotton. Hey, appreciate it. We'll see you next Sunday.